People. Good evening, members. This is C. Sanjay Nikam, Regional Council Member and Directors Committee Chairman of WIRC. It is I'm feeling the privilege and it is matter of immense pride for me to host you in this unique activity by WIRC, that is Direct Tax Study Course. After the grand success of DTRC, our efficient and energetic chairman Ketan Sayya sir conceptualized this idea that we should come forward and provide online facility of learning to the members. And accordingly, we planned this 10 session series of direct tax study course. And we selected unique topics for this and also the renowned faculties from the industry to share their expertise and knowledge. Today we have with us the youngest faculty of our WRC, Ankita Setia, and today is the seventh session of this series, and she is going to deliberate his expertise on the topic international taxation through kaleidoscope. So friends, before starting our proper session, I'll request our technical team to run our ICI motto song.
य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Thank you everyone for your gesture and respecting our alma mater. Now, friends, we have with us today's learned faculty, Ankita Setia, and also our chairman, who is behind all the successful activities we are running here. I'll request Ketan Sayya sir, chairman of WRC, to brief us about the update about the WRC activities. Over to you, Ketan sir.
Thank you so much, Sanjay bhai. I place on record sincere thanks to our today's learned speaker, Ankita madam, and also thanks to Seema madam for sparing their valuable time for this session. I think we all need to learn international tax because we have been seeing, so many cross-border transactions, so many people traveling abroad for the work, for the job, and we have to practice. A normal practitioner also need to have the knowledge of international taxation. So I'm sure with today's learned speakers' input, we will all able to, gain expertise and knowledge out of her session. Regarding other development, we have made several representation to the government authorities on the due dates, and we are expecting soon the extension of date to be announced by the government. Today, we have visited Maharera Authority. There's a due date of filing Form 5 139, and we have requested Maharera Authority to extend the same to 30th November. And I'm very glad to inform that the chairman, Honorable Chairman of Maharera, Manoj Ji, has orally confirmed that he will be looking into this and he will revise the date from 39 to appropriate date. So this is one good achievement which we had today by meeting Maharera Authority. Apart from the extension of due date, we represented on several other issues, including glitches in the online new portal of Maharera. There also, Chairman Sir said that please give us few volunteers and let them sit with our technical team and tell them about the problem which are faced on the portal. And I am very, very happy that we will have soon resolution of all practical issues being faced in this portal. So this was, one development which I thought will be useful for informing to the members. With this, in fact, Sanjay Bhai is very kind to give me all the credit, but it is his hard work and his input, because of which we are able to run not only DTSC but the help desk also. Twice a month we run a help desk on income tax. So Sanjay bhai, thank you so much for all your hard work being put in. Thank you. Over to you again.
Thank you, Chairman Sir, for updating us about the basic. Now, I normally say there are basic needs, roti, kapda, makan. For chartered accountants, there are one more need, that if completion of our assignment, some kind of extension also needed at this time. So this is also basic need for chartered accountant, and our WRC and ICI pursuing the matter with appropriate authorities, and definitely we'll see the right result of it in day or two. So now, friends, we have with us our one more senior member from the profession, CA Seema Mehta, ma'am. Welcome to the forum, ma'am. And I
Thank you.
request you to participate in this activity also. And I'll request you to introduce our today's faculty, Ankita Setia, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, WRC Chairman C.A. Ketan Saiyyaji and RCM Sanjay Nikamji for giving me the opportunity to introduce C.A. Ankita Setia. Today, our speaker is Ankita Setia. She is currently serving as a member of International Taxation and FEMA Committee of WRC ICI and working as Associate Director at SK Patodia and Associates LLP from last more than 6 years. She has completed her graduation from NM College of Commerce, Mumbai. She has post-qualification experience as chartered accountant of more than 13 years in FEMA compliance, international business advisory, taxation, and auditing. This Ankita's proficiency spans across assisting clients in deciding the suitable jurisdiction for incorporating entities both within and outside India, ensuring compliance with FEMA regulations, and advising on international business strategies. Ankita focuses on expanding clientele, developing relationships with global partners, networking with FEMA experts, and ensuring clients are compliant with FEMA rules and regulations. Her hands-on experience includes facilitating the incorporation of business in multiple countries such as USA, UK, Singapore, Canada, Europe, Dubai, Middle East, Mauritius, etc. Ankita is a part of various FEMA study circles in Mumbai and actively takes part as member and speaker with CTC, WRC, ICI on various topics such as overview of FEMA, FDI, ODI regulations, ECB filings, compounding under FEMA, liaison office, branch office, project setup office within and outside India. With this brief introduction, I welcome C. Ankita Setia. And Ankita, now the guys is yours virtually. Thank you.
Good evening, participants. Thank you so much to CA Seema ma'am for a wonderful introduction. And thank you to the WIRC team chairman Ketan sir, CA Sanjay Nikam sir, as well as the organizers for today's meeting. And I would also like to thank my friends and colleagues who have helped me in past couple of weeks to like summarize this presentation and help me put up the presentation for today. I am not an expert in the topic of international taxation. However, today I would like to give my best effort to make you understand an overall picture from a bird's eye perspective. And as the topic says, international taxation through kaleidoscope. So what is kaleidoscope? So you remember when we were kids, we used to have these toys like a tube or a binocular from which we used to peek and look at the pictures or colors, and there were various angles to this like that we could see beautiful pattern and colors and graphics which are being formed through the kaleidoscope. So as the kaleidoscope is a dynamic ever changing through different angles, similarly international taxation is so dynamic, and we have to look at the uh, tax aspect globally from different angles to have idea about it at gross level. So one should embrace the changes, shift perspective, and cultivate a kaleidoscope mindset to study international taxation as a topic. Also, today is the second day of Navratri, wherein we worship the goddess in India. So, with the blessings of Ma Durga and Ma Saraswati, let us begin our today's session. If there are any questions, we can discuss it at the end of the session, or you can write to me on my email ID, and I will be happy to answer all your questions. I have worked with many clients, such as large foreign MNCs, foreign nationals who want to set up their company in India, or many Indian MNC clients who have expanded their presence outside India through forming a subsidiaries in various countries such as USA, UK, Singapore, Mauritius. We also have assisted those clients for advisory on tax implications of various transactions, issuance of 15 CACB, claiming of foreign tax credit, filing of 3CB, and preparation of transfer pricing study reports. I want to convey to the young audience which is listening to this session today that if I can do and understand so much about international taxation, then you can also do it. If I have achieved whatever I have today, so it's not that difficult. You can also through your persistent efforts, you can also achieve those things. Also, today world has become a global village and businesses have some international touch point for sure. There will be hardly any transaction where global perspective is not looked at. Whether it is a developed country or developing country, everyone wants tax collection. And this tax collection is in a manner which is fair system of taxation. And all the countries, they are on a lookout for expanding the source of collection of taxes. So developing countries believe that international tax collection contributes to the income in whatever form contributes to the income in whatever form should get some fair share of taxes wherever the taxes are payable. And income may not be earned within India, but so what? If India is providing a market to these global countries, then they should also get a right to tax such global income in some form or the other. So, developing countries are coming up with the ideas which OECD has implemented under UN model, such as Article 12AA or Article 12B, which will be coming up. And these are digital taxation, diverted profits tax, equalization levy. uh, if I am making payment for whatever, then I must retain some portion of that tax. So this is the ideology which India is also following. So if any payment is made by a Indian customer to a foreign party, say for a dividend, for FTS, fees for technical services, or royalty, then some portion of it is withheld in the form of tax. And withholding tax is nothing but the TDS, which we know it in India. On the other hand, philosophy of developed nation is that they should be able to charge the tax, worldwide tax, on the corporates who have formed a company in their country. So even if they are operating and doing business in India, but if a company has formed their presence in USA, then the developed countries want to tax the entire income in USA. OECD has formed various policies such as BEPS and fundamental rules of BEPS. BEPS is base erosion and profit shifting. So ba- basically, it means that country is shifting its profit from a higher tax jurisdiction to a lower tax jurisdiction. And there are two pillars to the BEPS model. So pillar one is that it would reallocate the part of profits of largest and most profitable MNC from where they earn income to where they sell products or services. And pillar 2 is that it would impose 15% minimum tax to all the countries globally. So if we see now, let me share my screen. So basically, what is international tax? Whenever there are transactions happening between taxpayers of multiple countries, cross-border transactions are happening. Say a customer from India is buying some products or services from a company in UK, or if a company in USA is obtaining some services from an Indian company. So these scenarios create a global tax implications, and we must understand the laws of different countries and their impact on individuals and businesses. So why does international tax matter? So it will be we have to look at cross border transactions, income which are earned across countries, which can lead to complex tax implication. Then your residential status is of very vital importance, and there is a double taxation. So income that is taxed in twice. So this will also be looked at in today's presentation. So key concepts which we will learn today are taxation of same income in more than two jurisdictions. So how we have to ascertain, we will go through section 6, section 5, 9 and 90, 91. Then we will understand what is the role of double tax avoidance agreements and how we will claim the foreign tax credits. And we will also look at the transfer pricing in a nutshell. Now let us understand the basic of international tax. So there are two methods by which the taxes are applied globally. One is a residence based tax and another is a source based tax. So residence based tax is usually charged on individuals or corporates so this is generally followed by for residents of a country, and their worldwide income is charged to tax in that country. So if a Indian company is doing business globally, then their income from India as well as the global income will be charged to tax, and this concept is known as residence based tax. Then there is a source based tax. So right to tax income which has a source in a particular country. So NRI or a foreign company which is non-resident is taxed only on their India sourced income. This rule will be all typically followed for a non-resident. So whatever income is accruing or arising or they are receiving or deemed to receive in India, that will be charged to tax, and this is known as a source based tax. Now coming to the income tax section. So as I explained, first we will go through section 6, then we will cover section 5, and then we will go to section 9. Section 6 talks about the residential status, and like residential status is a core of understanding the taxation, be it domestic tax or a international tax. So first we need to identify whether a person is a resident or if he is a non-resident, or within resident there are two categories: resident and ordinarily resident, or resident but not ordinarily resident. So we all know these basic conditions, and I need not spend too much of time on this basic criteria. But we must take note that there are like certain aspects, like if you see the second this stay in India for 60 days or more in a previous year. So this 60 days is looked at 120 days in certain other section, such as section 61A. So residential status of there is one more important aspect which we have to check, that if a person is say going out of India on a particular day and visa stamp is on say today's date 23rd of September, and they have returned to India, say on 1st of January. So both these days, when the person has left India and the date on which they have returned to India, so both these dates will be counted as their stay in India. And this rule is very important to be taken care of. So then in the following cases, only basic condition number 1 is applicable for determination of residential status. Condition number 2 should be ignored. When an Indian citizen is leaving India during the previous year for employment, when an Indian citizen being crew member of Indian ship leaving India during the previous year, Indian citizen or person of Indian origin engaged outside India in an employment or a business or profession and visiting India during previous year, and his total Indian source income is within 15 lakh. So this is the new terminology as per section 6(1)(a) of 15 lakh, which I will explain in the next slide. It is important to note that person of Indian origin means a person who is either himself a Indian or his parents were born in a undivided India, or his grandparents were born in undivided India. So it goes only up to the two levels. And income from the 15 lakh limit which is there. So the income from foreign sources means income which is accruing or arising outside India, except income derived from a business control or a profession set up in India. And one has to always look at the residential status every year. So if a person is resident, say in 1 year, it need not necessarily be the case, and we have to look at all the conditions every year and determine the residential status for each assessment year. Now this is a 6(1)(a) deemed resident condition. So when an Indian citizen who is having a total income of more than 15 lakh Indian rupees during the previous year, and his residential status shall be determined as resident in India in that previous year, if he is not liable to tax in any other country or territory by reason of his domicile or residence or any other criteria of similar nature, and he is always treated as RNOR. So his status would not be ROR, but it will be RNOR, resident but not ordinarily resident. And so liable to tax here does not mean that the income is taxable on such a person under foreign country law. However, it just means that even if such person has subsequently been exempted from such tax liability under the law of that country, thus payment of tax is not a precondition. Only following conditions needs to be satisfied: existence of law of income tax in that country, and existence of income tax liability on the person under such law. Then we have to come to, this is the summary of the previous three slides, and it beautifully summarizes that what all conditions are required to be fulfilled if a person has to be treated as a resident, non-resident, or resident but not ordinarily resident. So important is the definition, this fourth part: citizen of India who has a total non-foreign source income. Non-foreign source income means a Indian income of more than INR 15 lakh, and he is not liable to tax in any other country or territory. And even though he is not physically present in India, but still they will be treated as RNOR. Now we will look at the residential status of a company. So a company is considered as a resident of India if they are a Indian company. This is the first condition. So Indian company means company registered under the Companies Act 2013 or Companies Act 1956. Then second condition is its place of effective management in that year is in India. Now, we have to look at the definition exactly what the Income Tax Act says. So, place of effective management means a place where key management and commercial decisions that are necessary for the conduct of business of an entity as a whole are in substance made. Here we must note that it is a key decisions, not the day-to-day decisions which needs to be taken. And one more important word is in substance. So in substance means actual economic in substance means the actual economic reality of the transaction, which is the true underlying intent of the transaction. And if it would have been in form, then it would mean literal outward appearance or legal documentation. So we have to always look at substance when it comes to Income Tax Act. And poem is determined based on this condition. So poem entity that, so it is interesting to note that an entity will have many place of managements in various countries, but it will only have one place of effective management from where its key decisions regarding the growth, regarding the key aspects of the company, regarding its revenue or strategic decisions are taken. So we must take note of this. And determination of poem, so is based on facts and circumstances of each case. So we cannot generalize based on suppose if we have read one case law, and we cannot generalize that similar facts are appearing in the case which you are referring. We have to always look at all the facts and circumstances of each case and then decide whether the poem will be determined in India or not. And practically, what happens if a assessing officer has to refer a case for a poem? So, what they will do is they will refer the matter to a three-member committee, which is consisting of principal commissioner or commissioner of income tax. So, there will be three people committee, and assessing officer will be referring the matter. And if this committee agrees that yes, this case falls under poem, then the three-member committee will give the assessee a chance to be heard before they decide that since the poem is in India, this company will be resident, and now you have to follow all the all the rules of a resident company. So after the necessary process is done by assessing officer, only then they will be able to like do the further assessment on the company. And how to determine poem? So there are two aspects here. One is a active business and a passive business, so we need to understand both very clearly. Active business means a company which is doing trading of goods or services with its actual customers. And passive business would mean that company subsidiary outside India is doing the transaction majorly with its holding company in India, or if it is only earning interest income or major portion of its earning is through dividends, all these cases it will classify the income as a passive income. And uh, if there is only passive income of a particular company, then they would automatically classify as having poem in India. So we must prove to the assessing officer that the subsidiary outside India, or be it any company which is operating in India, it has a actual poem, it has a active business. So, company first criteria is majority of the meetings of board of directors of the company are held outside India. Then, in such case, poem is presumed to be outside India unless the company falls in the second category. So, in the second category, companies engaged in active business, but the board of directors are standing aside and not exercising their power of management. Such powers are exercised either by the Indian holding company or other person resident in India. Poem will be in India even though the company is engaged in the active business and the board meetings are held outside India. because board of directors are not from. So what happened in this case is the even though board of directors were making all the decisions in the board meeting, but the instructions were ultimately coming from the Indian holding company. So if one like lifts the curtain, then it can actually see through the substance, that in substance the veto power of the company was foreign company was with the Indian holding company. Then companies, third category is companies which are not engaged in active business. So there is a two stage determination process. First stage is where identification of person who is actively making the key management and commercial decision of the conduct of company's business as a whole. So if we identify that such persons are in India, then we have to go to the second stage examination. And second stage examination says that determination of the place where the management and commercial decisions are in effect made based on the following: place of holding board meeting, place of head office, the place where day to day routine operational decisions undertaken by junior and middle management is irrelevant for the purpose of determination of poem. So, if the answer to this question and further considerations indicate that the substance of business decision is taken in India, then the poem is in India. And effectively, the place where management decisions are taken is more important than the place where such decisions are implemented. And to determine poem, it is substance which is conclusive rather than the form. Now, following are the facts which by themselves will not conclude that a company holds poem of a foreign company in India. An Indian company is 100% owned by a foreign company. There is a permanent establishment of a foreign entity in India. Residence of one or some of the directors of a foreign company is in India. Existence and situation of local management in India in respect of activities carried out by a foreign company in India, the existence of support functions in India, there are preparatory and auxiliary in character. Along with these facts, if the substance as discussed in the above criteria is also in India, then poem would likely be in India. And as we already discussed, that passive income will consist of purchase and sale of goods services to or from associated enterprise. Then there is a income which is earned by royalty, dividend, capital gain, interest, or rental income. So all these would classify under passive income. Then there is a active business. So uh, where passive business is not more than 50% of company's total income and less than 50% of total assets are situated in India, less than 50% of total numbers or of employees are situated in India or resident in India, payroll expenses incurred on such employee is less than 50% of its total payroll expenditure. So with this, we have determined that if the poem is in India or not. Suppose if poem falls in India, then what happens? So we have to look at then consequences. And consequence, if I tell you in a nutshell, if a company is announced that it has a poem in India by the assessing officer, then they have to follow all the rules and regulation which a normal Indian company is following. So this company will need to register itself in India with ROC. They need to obtain a PAN number, and then they need to start, like they also need to obtain a TAN number to deduct the TDS. So they will need to do all the compliances, file the tax returns, GST returns. There will be all these conditions, like all these criteria which are there, so they have to follow all these procedures. And section 115JH was inserted specifically for such companies where poem is decided to be notified in India. And if there is a doubt that poem is in India or not, there is a tiebreaker clause in the DTAA, and one can look at it to avoid any penalty or interest. So now after section 6 we will come to section 5, which says that based on the residential status what all income of the person is taxed in India. So there are three important factors to section 5. First is the residential status, then second is the place of accrual or receipt of income, and third is a point of time of accrual or receipt of income. So income deemed received means received in India. Yeah, this is an important point that if a person has say earned some income in UK in the year financial year 22-23, and if that person brings that money to India in the year 23-24, and if that person had declared his global income of year 22-23 of UK income in India in the year 22-23, so when he is getting that money in India in the year 23-24, in that year he will not be charged to tax on that income again. So income does not means when it is received in India, but if when it is subsequently remitted to India, it cannot be treated as receipt of income in India. And income can be in cash or in kind. So if a person says that to avoid the tax liability, I am giving you this X particular sum of amount in say crypto, or if they are saying that I will give you so and so worth of jewelry or so and so XYZ whatever item in return in exchange of the money which is due to you. So if the tax department will find out that there is a consideration received in kind, then even that will be construed as your income. And income accrual in India means income generated in India or source of income of such income is situated in India. So this is a summary of section 5. It basically says that for a resident and ordinarily resident ROR, worldwide income from all sources which is received or deemed to be received in India, accrues or arises or deemed to accrue or arise in India, or accrues or arises to such person outside India. So this condition is specifically for residents where their income accruing or arising outside India is also taxable in India. Then we come to RNOR. Their income, which is received in India or deemed to receive in India, accrues or arises or deemed to accrue or arise in India, accruing or arising outside India from a business controlled in India, and accruing or arising outside India from the profession set up in India. So it has a tie with India. So it's not a like income which has no ties to the Indian jurisdiction. So because of this reason, RNOR's this income will be taxed in India. Then if we look at the non-resident, then if they have received any income which is deemed to be received in India, or if any income is accruing or arising or deemed to accrue or arise in India, only these incomes will be taxed in India for a non-resident. So let us go to now section 9. Section 9 talks about the Section 9 is one of the fundamental provisions relevant for a non-resident's tax exposure in India. So it says that income which is accruing or arising outside India through or from a business connection in India, or property or asset or source of income which is situated in India, or through transfer of such capital asset which is situated in India. So this is the entire section 911, which is broken down in the flowchart form. So we can look at also another section 912, which basically deals with salary, taxability of salary in India. Section 913 deals with taxation of salary given by government of India. Section 914 deals with the dividend income which is given by a company in India. Section 915 talks about interest paid by a Indian company. Section 916 talks about royalty paid by a Indian company or Indian person. And section 917 talks about fees for technical services. Section 918 talks about gifts. So these are the incomes on which non-resident may have to pay tax based on the exact conditions which are explained in the section 9. We have to, based on the section 9, we have to understand now what is a business connection and a permanent establishment. So business connection is not a one-off activity. There has to be a continuous business relations with the Indian. There has to be a continuous nexus and not a isolated nexus. Nexus means a connection. So if let us see in the case of GVK Industries, there was a judgment by Andhra High Court. So it has laid down the principles that where there is a business connection in India of a non-resident is a mixed question of law and facts and must be determined on the facts and circumstances of each case. A business connection involves relation between business carried on by a non-resident which yields profits or gains and some activity in India which contributes directly or indirectly to the earning of those profits or gains. The essence of business connection is the existence of close, real, intimate relation and commonness of interest between non-resident and person in India, where there is a control or management of finances of the Indian person or substantial equity holding by the non-resident or sharing of profits between the NR and Indian person, the essence in C is achieved. To constitute business connection, there must be continuity of activity or operation of the non-resident with the Indian person. A stray or isolated transaction is not enough to establish a business connection. One more important term is significant economic presence, which is also known as SEP. So, if the non-resident has a significant economic presence in India, then it will constitute as a having business connection in India. Significance economic presence refers to certain transactions or activities by a non-resident that creates a taxable nexus in India, even if the non-resident has no physical presence or business establishment in that country. Under SCP provisions, only income that can be attributed to activities or transactions conducted in India is subject to Indian tax. And Finance Act 2020 has added one more category of relation of NR in India to constitute BC, the business connection in India. As per this, a non-resident would have a business connection in India if it has a significant economic presence. And there are two monetary limits which are very, like, it's good that they have come up with this so that it is, we can identify it monetarily and we can find out if there is a actual any significant economy, because what will be significant economic presence that we cannot identify through a number. So government has given that if a person is earning income from Indian sources exceeding 2 crore rupees, a person is a non-resident here. So if they are earning from India more than 2 crore rupees by any service, property, including provision of download of data or software, sale of goods, all any such criteria, and if they are earning more than 2 crores from India. And second condition is where the non-resident is systematically and continuously soliciting business activities or engages in interaction with 3 lakh users in India through digital means. So in today's time, we can say YouTubers or any social media influencers who are having a followers from India of more than 3 lakh users, and if they are say selling indirectly some services from their platform to such 3 lakh people, then even if the monetary limit is say not exceeding 2 crores, still they would be classified as having a significant economic presence. And uh, so they need not physically have ever come to India. They are just remotely doing their activity and sourcing business from India. So that will classify as them having significant economic presence in India. Coming to the important part now, which is relief from double taxation. So if a person is say having charged on their income in both the countries, if they're so they are providing some services in India, and India is also charging a tax by way of a withholding, and because he is a resident of USA, US is also charging tax on the same income. So he will be allowed credit of those taxes, say in if he has to file a return of income in India, then he can claim the credit of taxes already paid in USA. And if he's filing his say tax return in USA, then he can claim the credit of taxes paid in India. So here there are section 90 deals with the countries with which India has a double tax avoidance agreement, which is also known as a treaty. And section 91 deals with countries with which India does not have any double tax avoidance agreement. And if a person has earned any income, uh, and income is from outside India, and if he is a non-resident, then their income will not be taxed in India. So they, for those cases, we need not look at any act or treaty, anything. Coming to section, again, this is a detailed explanation of section 90 and section 91. So 90 is known as a bilateral, for bilateral treaties, and 91 is a unilateral relief given to the countries with which India does not have a DTAA. And these are certain conditions which one must fulfill in order to get the benefit of section 91. India currently has a treaty with more than 90 countries, just for your information. And GAR, which we will discuss at the like later part of this presentation, that if GAR is invoked, general anti avoidance rules, then treaty benefits can be denied to the taxpayer, even if they are more beneficial. And the basic and most important rule of the treaty, like this section 90, is that provision of the Income Tax Act or uh, uh, treaty which are more, whichever is the more beneficial to the assessee, only those rules will apply to the person in question. And now I will just like to point you that some of the important provisions which we must remember for the treaty. So, if one has to, as it is explained here, if one has to avail the benefit of treaty, they must obtain a TRC, which is tax residency certificate, and Form 10F. I have covered both these points in the later part of this presentation. Uh, and this is just section 91 given in detail. Uh, this you can just read. So, what is exactly the role of tax treaties? What are the DTAAs? I would like to clarify a few points here. That by way of a treaty, one cannot impose any tax. So, if suppose today dividend was exempt in India, which was the case a few years ago, and if treaty says that there should be a tax of say 10% on dividend, so because of the treaty, if some income is not chargeable to tax as per the domestic laws of India, then the treaty or DTAA does not have any right to impose the tax. The double tax avoidance agreements cannot thrust upon any tax which is not already present as per the domestic law. And so no new tax claim can be made by virtue of a treaty which otherwise does not exist under domestic law. Treaties cannot create any additional tax burden. It can only relieve the tax principle of non-aggregation. So this is called as a principle of non-aggregation, wherein treaties can only reduce the tax burden from the assessee and not impose any additional tax burden. Also, practically, we have come across some cases where so at the time of filing the return, some treaty benefit was claimed by the assessee. At the assessment stage, they decided to withdraw the application of treaty, and they went ahead with the normal domestic law provision. So assessee has the right legally to anytime withdraw the benefit if they are taking any from the treaty. So it is not that once you have claimed a benefit in your return, then you must keep continuing with the same stand even at the time of assessment. So one can withdraw the stand taken earlier. Also, there are certain type of income. So, purpose of the treaty is basically to eliminate double taxation, and they will encourage at a broader level investment in particular countries. So, if India has to get more from more capital and more investment from other countries, then it needs to have favorable tax treaties with those countries. The double tax avoidance agreements also help in preventing the tax evasion. So at a higher level, there are exchange of information agreements which are signed between countries. So how India will say obtain data of the assessees who have got houses in Dubai. So if a person has not declared that they have a house in Dubai, so it will be obviously be shared to the Indian government by the Dubai authorities, and ultimately the assessees will get a notice from the tax authorities because there is a exchange of information between India and Dubai. And for applying the credit, there are various methods which we will discuss in the future slides. So there are three types of models in the of the treaty. One is a OECD model, second is a UN model, and third is a US model. So OECD model is generally followed by developed countries, which gives right to tax based on residence principle. Then UN model is followed by developing countries, which gives right to tax based on the source principle. And US has its own model, and they frame their own policies. So their model is different, and it is known as a US model. India is following UN model. These are certain types of DTAA. Multilateral instruments is the called as MLI, which is recently signed by India with countries of various countries in the world, and that will also come into that will be active once it is signed between the governments, but it is notified that MLI will come. So some of the basic features of tax treaty, that tax residency treaty benefits are available only to residents of one of the contracting states, generally governed by Article 4 of the tax treaty. Then allocation of taxing rights. So Article 6 to 22 characterize particular income for the purpose of allocation in the country of source and in the country of residence. Article 7 is an exception to this rule, which provides business profits shall be taxable in the country of source only if it has a P, permanent establishment over there. Then there is a mechanism to claim the tax credit. There are two methods, credit method and exemption method, which we will discuss later slides. As I told, exchange of information is an agreement signed between various countries. They are providing sensitive information to the tax administration for their compliance purposes. Limitation of benefits is a LOB clause which is present in various treaties which India has signed. And what it basically means is that if the purpose of treaty was to take the tax, purpose of the agreement was to take the tax benefit, then such benefits may be limited. Most favored nation, this will also be discussed in detail at the later part of the slide. Make available. So what is this make available clause? Where any suppose a company in USA, they are providing a consulting services to a company in India, and they are Indian company is so make available basically means that technical knowledge, expertise, skill is transferred to the recipient of services in such a manner that recipient of service is able to apply knowledge independently after such services are completed. If I have taught someone provisions of some act, and if that person is able to do it on their own at a later stage, that means I am making available those skills to the person. So if make available is present in any agreement, then those services will be taxed, and if make available is not present, then there will not be any taxes. So only in few treaties for fees for technical services, this make available clause is there. And if make available clause is there, then you must identify the actual meaning of the transaction. And DTAA can contain clause that cross border payment for services where there is make available, that is genuine transfer of knowledge, are taxed and not the other services. So if a person is just providing services every year for the same kind of assignment, and Indian company is not able to do it on their own, then it is not a make available, and in such cases those income will not be charged to tax. Beneficial ownership, one must always look at who is the actual ultimate controller of the company. And we have seen that there are various layers of company people. In order to hide the actual ownership, people are forming layers and layers of company. But as per Companies Act, we know that there are only two layers of company structure which are allowed. So this is all done to mitigate the hardships which are found by the, like, hardships which are there, to identify the actual beneficial owner. Then there is a non-discrimination clause present in treaties. This basically means that if there is any nationality based non-discrimination, say national of Pakistan and national of Afghanistan, just example, that for taxability of both those countries will be on the same level. We cannot say that because you are national of so and so country, you will be charged to tax on a higher rate. Then situs based non discrimination, which means a permanent establishment. So if a person say a company, Indian company, which is having like, if a company is having permanent establishment, uh, a foreign company is having permanent establishment in India, and if a Indian company which is already registered in India, so they both are considered as residents of India. So then both the companies should not be discriminated on taxes on the basis of their P. Then ownership based tax discrimination means that suppose if a Italian company has formed a subsidiary, so Indian company is registered in India, they have a owners which are Italian, and a second company is a Indian company which with the Indian owners. So both these are essentially the companies registered in India, and because of the ownership there should be no discrimination between them. There are mutual agreement procedures which are there between the tax. So governments are entering into mutual agreement where there are certain issues which are not resolved by the provisions of treaty. This is a basic illustration of how the income is taxed in two jurisdictions. Uh, so I'll just explain. Uh, so in this case, foreign company has rendered technical services to an Indian company from outside India, and fees is paid by Indian company to foreign company. These services will be taxable in India even where services are rendered from outside India in the jurisdiction of foreign company. India would subject the fees to gross basis Indian withholding tax, as income would be deemed to accrue or arise in India. So let me explain here the gross basis of tax and net basis of tax. When a person, say Indian company, is making a payment to foreign company, in this case of say $100, and there is a provision of TDS of 20% on the FTS. So if Indian company makes a payment of say 100, there will be withholding of 20, so the foreign company will get 80 in their hand. And if foreign company has entered into some agreement with the Indian company that they don't want to lose out on this tax and follow the procedures to claim the foreign tax credit in USA, they want 100. They if Indian company is not agreeing to pay full 100, then they will not provide those services to the Indian company. So in that case, what will happen? The Indian company, while making the payment, will gross up the taxes. So they will ultimately pay the 100 to the foreign company, and they will do the reverse calculation and identify the 20%. Like they will pay, in this case they will pay say $125, and if we calculate 20% on 125, it will become $25. So 25 withholding will be applied and net 100 will be paid to the foreign company. So this will have this way the income is grossed up, and there is no loss to the foreign company. They are getting full 100 as their fees. But here, as we know that since foreign jurisdiction, for the like US company will tax the income of a foreign company in USA, and India is also making a withholding on the payment. So this leads to double taxation of income earned by a foreign company. There are cases of double taxation or double non-taxation. These are self-explanatory. Then there is a juridical double taxation, where same person is getting taxed in US and India, which we have seen in the earlier case study. And there is a economic double taxation where same income is taxed twice. This is the summary of a tax treaty. Articles of the tax treaty and its structure is explained in this table 3-part summary. So all the articles 1 to 31 are described here. We have to understand the concept of may be taxed, shall be taxed. All these are there in the mentioned in the treaty. So shall be taxed only means it gives exclusive rights to a one country. May be taxed means exclusive rights are given to a country of source. This is given by various case judgments in India. And may be taxed means that exclusive rights is given to the source country. May also be taxed means it can be taxed in both the countries. And if a wording is may only be taxed in the tax treaty, then it is different from may be taxed. So we have to look at the exact wordings of the treaty. Also, when you are referring to a treaty on the income tax website, so there are two types of agreement: comprehensive agreement, and there is a synthesized text. So you have to look at comprehensive agreement while advising the clients. Also, one of the yeah, so as I had explained, that I will explain the most favored nation clause. What happens here, that if there are, say, 10 countries which are under the, which is a member of OECD. So in this example, India, Switzerland is a OECD member. India has entered into the Switzerland with the tax treaty, and Article 10, which is dividend, it says that dividend paid by a company which is resident of a contracting state to resident of other contracting state. So here state means country. This is a technical language of the treaty, but state would mean it is a country. Then if so in this case, Switzerland is saying that there will be a withholding of 10% or a tax of 10% on the dividend. Now, if later on India takes part in the treaty with another OECD country, and if in that country's treaty, India agrees for a 5% withholding. So, in that case, what will happen, that the treaty which is already in existence, India Swiss treaty, that will also classify under the benefit of this most favored nation clause, and they will also fall under the tax dividend tax rate of 5%. So if we read the exact wordings of the MFN clause, it says, if under any convention, agreement or protocol between India and a third state which is member of the OECD, signed after signature of this amending protocol, India limits its taxation at source on dividend, interest, royalties or fees for technical services to a rate lower than the rate provided for in the agreement on the set items of income. The same rate as provided for in that convention, agreement or protocol on the said item of income shall also apply between both contracting states under this agreement as from the date on which such convention, agreement or protocol enters into force. Also, as we discussed, principal purpose test under MLI. So, principal purpose test was introduced through Article 7 of MLI under OECD's BEPS measures. Once incorporated into a DTAA, principal purpose test operates as an additional safeguard against treaty abuse in conjunction with GAR rules under domestic law. So it is similar to a GAR rule, which is there in India. So similarly, for other like this, PPT is there for treaties. Core provision: if the principal purpose or one of the principal purpose of an arrangement or transaction is to obtain benefit under the DTAA, the treaty benefit may be denied. And if the sole intent and object or purpose of the agreement was not to take the benefit of the treaty, then the provisions will be available. The determination of treaty benefit eligibility lies with the competent authorities of both the contracting jurisdiction, ensuring bilateral consistency. Example is given here, which is of India Mauritius DTAA. In the revised India Mauritius DTAA, a new Article 27B has been inserted. It provides that treaty benefits shall be denied where the main purpose of an arrangement or transaction is to obtain a tax benefit, unless the arrangement is in line with the genuine objectives of the treaty. Conceptual role of PPT: discourages treaty shopping and round tripping structures, ensures tax treaty benefits are available only to transactions having genuine commercial and economic substance, and it operates complementary with GAR. So, how do we, what are the methods to claim a foreign tax credit? I will just explain one case study. Suppose I have earned, say, dividend from a US company, and in USA there is a withholding of 20% tax. So my dividend income was of $100. There is a withholding of 20, and I have received $80 from USA, and I am a resident of India. I am in India. I am filing my return of income, and if I am falling under the highest tax slab, so my income would be taxed at the rate of 30% in India. In this case, I can claim the benefit of a foreign tax credit which is paid, and as in the case of individual, I you can't say that my total income will be taxed at 30%. So if an individual is being looked at from this if we have to calculate the effective tax rate of the individual. So suppose if an individual's income is, say, 20 lakh rupees, and their total tax liability is coming after all the calculation to, say, 2 lakh rupees, even if that person is falling under the highest tax slab, for example. So we cannot say that he falls under the 30% tax slab. So his income of, say, this 100 in India, his effective tax rate in this example is 10%, because on 20 lakh of total income he has paid tax of 2 lakh. So effective tax rate is 10%. So the foreign tax credit which he can claim is also 10%. So even though his 20% TDS was deducted in USA, he cannot claim the full 20% as a FTC, and he will only be eligible to claim $10 out of the 20 which are deducted by US government. So this is just a hypothetical example which I wanted to make you understand. So the method this which I was explaining you, that is called as the credit method, where one country is giving credit to the other country for taxes which are paid in the other country. Then there is a exemption method. So some countries will provide full exemption, and residence country does not tax income taxable. So if say I had earned the income from, in the same example, from USA, then as per this method, if India USA was following exemption method, then the entire dividend income would be exempt from tax in my Indian ITR. But this is not very commonly used. Now we have to look at the residential. This is the most important article of the treaty, which is resident, because we if a person is not resident of either of the contracting state, then they will not be able to claim the benefit of the treaty. Suppose there is a tri-party arrangement some between India, USA, and UK, and UK has made some payments out of this arrangement to India, but the entire agreement is between India and USA. On paper, everything is between India and USA. So, because the UK company is not a party to this India US DTAA, so UK company cannot say that I want to claim a benefit which is available in this US treaty. So, it has to be UK company can use the India UK DTAA and find out if there are any provisions which are useful to them. But we cannot go to the third country's provision, and it has to be either one of the two contracting states. If we are taking example of India and USA, then the person has to be either a tax resident of India, or they have to be tax resident of USA. Then so article 4 of the treaty, there are article 4.1 describes the definition of resident. Article 4.2 is tiebreaker rule for a individual, and article 4.3 is tiebreaker rule for persons other than individual. these are some of the important like criterias. Liable to tax by reason of his domicile or residence or any other criteria of similar nature, comprehensive taxation. Liable to tax versus subject to tax, these two terms also needs to be studied. Then it does not include any person who is liable to tax only in respect of income from sources in that state, and some treaties prescribe number of days stay as a condition for residence under treaty, example UAE or Kuwait. If a person is RNOR, then they are liable to tax in respect of their income sourced in India. And RNOR may not be considered as a resident of India, and they may not be able to claim the benefit of the treaty provisions. How so this tiebreaker rule, one must understand that it always has to go through these four criterias. First criteria is a permanent home test. Then if this test, so why one must go for a tiebreaker rule? Suppose I have my place of residence in Dubai as well as in India, and I am not able to decide based on the conditions of the law of both the countries that whether I would classify as a resident of in India or I would classify as a resident of Dubai. So if there is no clarity and there are some technical aspects of the law through which one is not able to determine their residential status, then for those cases they have to follow this tiebreaker rule. In tiebreaker rule, which are explained in Article 4, one has to follow the same pattern while identifying residential status. First test they have to do is a permanent home test. If permanent home, if a person has a permanent home only in one country, suppose in India, then they will be classified as a resident of India. If I have permanent home in say India and Dubai both, then I have to look at the second test, which is center of vital interest test. And center of vital interest test is in detail explained in the next slide. But if suppose I have a center of vital interest determinable in India, then I will go become a resident of India. Then if I my center of vital interest is not determinable, then we have to go to the third test, which is habitual abode test. If I have a habitual abode in India, then I would classify as a resident of India. If I have habitual abode in not in India, then say in Dubai, then I would classify as a resident of Dubai. If I have a habitual abode in both the countries, there may be some rare cases where a person is habitually residing in both the countries, then we have to look at their nationality. So if I am a Indian resident, Indian national, and I have habitual abode in both the countries, India and Dubai, then based on the nationality test, if I am Indian, then I would classify as a resident of India. And if suppose a person has taken nationality of Dubai as well, so they will classify as national of India as well as Dubai. And if a person is not ultimately able to, out of these four tests, not able to determine the residential status, then they have to go to a last resort, which is mutual agreement between the competent authorities. So authorities of India and Dubai will determine the residential status in such cases. So you can look at the permanent home test. What are the criteria here? That home must be permanently available. Any mode of accommodation available for a limited period cannot be classified as a permanent home. If there is a accommodation for a short duration, then say available during vacation, business travel, education travel, then it is not a permanent home. There are cases wherein rented apartment is also treated as a permanent home because a person is staying only in the rented apartment from a very long time. In case of Dr. Rajnikant Bhatt, they were like accommodated themselves in staff quarters, and the this was quarter was provided by the employer, but still it was their permanent home. In case of DCIT versus Sri Kumar, uh, owned house, a person had a own house, but they were not staying in that house, and that was let out to someone. Then in that house, even if it is their own ownership, but if they are not staying there, then it will not classify as their permanent home. Second test is of vital interest test, that preference is given to the state with which person has economic relations, and they are more closer to that country. There are following factors which can be considered. They have family or social relation, political, cultural or other activities. They have place of business or work in that country. So, in these circumstances, their center of vital interest will be classified in that country. In the case of Norman Gordey versus Majesty of Queen, it was held that this person is having a center of vital interest in Canada. So, the facts of the case are: employee, while on a travel for assignment to Egypt, never intended to give up their economic and personal relation with home country. He continued to hold all his assets in home country, which is Canada. They made necessary arrangement to look after assets before leaving home country. So they had kept some arrangement in Canada. They did not maintain economic relation in host country, which is Egypt, and they were limited to meet his day to day expenses, and he did not purchase a car in Egypt. In the second case, Bangalore ITAT, in the case of Sri Kumar Sanjeev Ranjan, it was concluded that center of vital interest was in the USA. So the person was having his spouse and children as a US citizen. They had two house properties and a car in US. They had voting rights in the US. They had social ties closer to the US. US investment in shares, mutual fund, contribution to 401k, which is their pension scheme. So all this was there. So if all these factors can be proved, then they have a center of vital interest in that country. Third is this habitual abode test, where quantum of stay in particular contracting state is important rather than purpose. Then OECD and UN commentary states that whether individual lived habitually in the sense of being customarily or usually present, frequency, duration, and regularity of stay that are part of the settled routine of an individual life, habitual abode in two states is possible. So, in the case of Mumbai ITAT versus Shalini Sikand, she had a habitual abode in India. Habitual abode requires actual living habitually, consistently, and regularly in the state. Habitual abode of Sri Lankan citizen post her marriage with Indian national will be in India by moving to India on a permanent basis. So, when a person in today's time, this is very common that a person from India is making payment to a overseas company, and at the time of making this payment, bank will ask for a 15 CACB. For issuing 15 CB, the CA will ask that please provide me with the tax residency certificate of the payee, so that we can determine their taxability on this transaction. And also, as per the rules of recent developments, the payee has to file Form 10F, as well as they have to give the TRC, upload the TRC while filing Form 10F. And this is important so that there will be no higher deduction of TDS. So in order to avoid the tax liability, to claim the benefits of DTAA, following this rule is very essential. uh, so for some of the important aspects of Form 10F, which one must have, that some of the documents, such as they need to, it's not necessary that they need to have a PAN in India. They can provide their own home country's tax identification number. They should be of they should provide their nationality. They can provide their if tax identification number is also not provided, some people are very rigid and they don't want to share their tin number, then we can also put up their passport number. Then validity of TRC is very essential. Suppose if you are making a payment today on the say 23rd of December, and TRC will be active say only TRC has recently expired on say 20th of September, then they must obtain a fresh TRC, and only then we can upload the form 10F, because if TRC is expired then it cannot be used. TRC is generally valid for a period of 1 year, and like we from our experience, the countries such as UK, USA, they all are providing TRCs to their nationals, and it may take up to 1 month to get the TRC in some cases. In some cases, there is a fast turnaround time, but it may take up to 1 month. And Form 10F filing was earlier with the digital signature, but now even digital signature requirement is done away with, and it can be filed through a OTP or a e-verification code, which will be received on the mobile number or a email ID, and that's how the Form 10F is filed. Some documents such as TRC, tax identification number, those needs to be uploaded while filling up Form 10F. If your non-resident partner is not agreeing to give any of this, then there is no recourse but to deduct the tax at higher rate, and they must understand the rules of India if they want to like get the payments in a timely manner with the proper taxes. These are certain steps which are to be followed, and these are very self-explanatory and in detail. So you can go through this presentation is going to be uploaded on the WIRC website. So you can download for the presentation from there and go through the steps. If a person is a non-resident, and how do we determine their taxability in India? So one is through IT Act and other one is through a DTAA. Non-resident, if the country with which India does not have a DTAA, then they will be taxed as per the Income Tax Act. If they have a country with which India has DTAA, then we have to look at DTAA or Income Tax Act, whichever is more beneficial. Now we will look at various schemes, income streams. So first stream is business income. In case of left side, we are looking at the countries with which India does not have DTAA. Right side, we are looking at the countries with which India has DTAA. So as per the latest rules, foreign companies are taxed at 35%. So here the rate of 35% is applicable. For royalty, as per Income Tax Act, 20% is applicable. However, if the treaty has to be seen, then we have to refer to the Article 12 and study if there is a better rate possible. Similarly, for fees for technical services, Act says 20%, and treaty says, as per treaty, we have to look at Article 12. Also, one important point is, on the left side, whatever rates are there as per the Act, we need to apply the surcharge, education cess, etc. on these tax. However, when any tax is applied as per the DTAA, you need not add any surcharge or education cess. It is a full tax as per the DTAA. So, in case of dividend, we have to look at Article 10. Then, in case of interest income, there are various possibilities. Also, as per the treaty, we have to look at Article 11. In case of capital gain, there are various possibilities, short term, long term. And as per the treaty, we have to look at Article 13. So this is a summary table for the non-resident tax rates, and this is very important and useful if one wants to refer. So as I explained, surcharge and cess should not be added to the DTAA rate. DTAA rate represents the total tax. Now, topic of international taxation is incomplete if we don't discuss the transfer pricing. So what is transfer pricing essentially? I will just cover this topic in say 10 minutes. When country of say if India has a company named ABC has formed a subsidiary in Singapore. Indian company is being taxed at the rate of 30%. For example, Singapore company is being taxed at the rate of 15%. So what will India do? India will, when it is dealing with their own subsidiary abroad, they will purposely increase the price of the product that they are selling to the Singapore company. So this way, for Indian company, the taxation is getting reduced because they are increasing their expenses. Sorry, so I missed out the exam. I made a mistake. So in this case, India is say purchasing products from its subsidiary in Singapore, and the Singapore product is actually of price 10, but India is buying it at 15, which is higher than the arm's length price. So arm's length price is the price that would be charged between unrelated parties. So if the customer in Singapore is selling the same product, company in Singapore is selling the same product to its customer at 10, and if they are selling the same thing to Indian company at 15, so what they are doing is they are inflating the profits in Singapore and increasing the cost in India. So this way they will reduce their tax burden in India, and they will uh, increase the taxable income in Singapore, because Singapore is paying the taxes at a lower rate than India. So, in order to avoid such practices, transfer pricing mechanism is followed, and we can look at Chapter 10 of Income Tax Act for all the provisions. Some of the examples where the in general, where a foreign company sets up a subsidiary in India or sets up a JV in India, some of the following transactions may be undertaken between the foreign company and the Indian company. So services rendered by a foreign company to Indian company, or vice versa, sale or purchase of goods or by one to the other, secondment of employees by foreign company to Indian company, bank guarantee by parent company to subsidiary or to joint venture company, loan by one to the other, or any other transaction. And we must also understand the meaning of associated enterprise here. So, what is associated enterprise? Where loan, suppose if in case, so associated enterprise essentially means that both the companies form part of the same group. They have shareholding in each other, or the decision makers or directors of both the companies are same. These are some of the conditions. If these are also fulfilled, then these companies will be called as a associated enterprise. So if there are international transactions between such associated enterprise, or even I would say in case of transfer pricing, there are certain specified domestic transaction which also fall under transfer pricing. So it is not only international, but even domestically, if the companies are following such policies, then they have to look whether they are applicable for transfer pricing. So the arm's length price is the core principle, and one the company has to determine arm's length price. So there are various methods which are available as per the regulation of section 92C. So there is a comparable uncontrolled price, which is cup method, then resale price method, then there is a cost plus method, profit split method, transactional net margin method, which is TNMM method, and there is a other method. So generally speaking, what I have seen is companies find out that in their same industry, what the other companies are charging, and that is the first method, comparable uncontrolled price method. So generally, the arm's length price is determined on the basis of this cup method. So, in order to prepare the entire study report, uh, one has to find out which is the most appropriate method out of the given methods, and they have to then find out the arm's length price. So, to decide the most appropriate method, these are some of the ways in which it can be done. What filings and documentation are required in terms of transfer pricing? So one has to keep the transfer pricing study report if their transaction value exceeds 1 crore rupees. uh, International transactions are exceeding 1 crore rupees between the associated enterprise, and if that is not the case, then they need not maintain the transfer pricing study report. The entire list of documents which needs to be prepared are explained in the next slide. Then there is a form 3CEB, which is the audit under transfer pricing regulation. So if there is a single transaction between the associated enterprise of between India and the other country, even if there is a one single transaction of a small amount, say INR 1 lakh, even then they have to file the form 3CEB. So this is the set of documents as per the rule 10D, which is for transfer pricing study report. Here we have given the entire summary of transfer pricing provisions. Now come we are so government has taken one more good initiative, which is safe harbor rules. Suppose if certain companies don't want to follow rigid transfer pricing rules, and they don't want to do in-depth study report, and they want to just like adopt a certain specific percentage which is given by the government, that if you do follow this percentage, then you need not do the transfer pricing related documentation. So what this rule says, that if if so if there are certain situation where income tax authorities shall automatically accept transfer price declared by the assessee, provided transaction meets the predefined condition, and their aim is to reduce litigation, simplify compliance, and bring certainty to international and domestic related party transaction. Businesses engaging in cross-border intragroup transaction often face complex audit. Safe harbor provides a compliance-friendly alternative. So, what are the benefits of adopting safe harbor rules? That there will be certainty that the price which is declared by the company will be accepted by the assessing officer. Chances of litigation are reduced. There is a ease of compliance, and it is cost effective because one does not have to maintain so much of documentation and reports. So it is obviously a cost effective approach. So, which companies are eligible, which transactions are eligible under these safe harbor provisions? As per Rule 10 TB, safe harbor is applicable only to eligible assessees which are engaged in specific low risk activities like software development or IT enabled services, contract R&D for software or generic pharmaceuticals, intragroup loan or corporate guarantees, OEM sales in auto components, receipt of low value intragroup services. So the point number 3 and point number 5, these are very common transactions in transfer pricing, where parent has given loan to a subsidiary, or subsidiary has given any loan to a Indian company, or where there are like management consultancy services is provided between parent and subsidiary. So generally, any company which are into this can take route of safe harbor rules. So eligible. So these are some of the like general notification and conditions. A person who is opting for safe harbor, they have to file form. So there is one form name which I am not recollecting right now, but for obtaining the benefit of safe harbor, a form has to be filed. Let me just check. So Form 3CEFA, this is the form which has to be filed for adopting for the safe harbor rule. And as per the recent CBDT notification of 2025, the safe harbor rule is extended for the assessment year 25-26 and 26-27, giving taxpayers longer term certainty, and the transaction threshold are increased. So now one can opt for safe harbor rules up to INR 300 crores transaction, the limit for which earlier was INR 200 crores. And EV sector is core auto components are included. Lithium ion batteries used in electric hybrid vehicle, bringing the EV battery value chain within safe harbor coverage. Implications for taxpayers: more companies can benefit from simplified compliance and certainty under safe harbor, especially in industries expanding due to EV adoption. Planning cycle can be more stable as per the safe harbor rule framework, because it is fixed for 2 more years, and reduce risk of adjustment or dispute for eligible international related party transaction meeting the revised threshold and scope. And lastly, we would like to discuss the concept of GAR and BEPS. So, what is GAR? Essentially, when a company is following various practices by which they are avoiding taxes, they are taking benefit of treaties which should not have been done in a legal form. So, they are illegally taking some transactions and obtaining a tax benefit of more than 3 crore, which is INR 330 million rupees. So if a benefit is exceeding beyond this, tax benefit is exceeding beyond 3 crore rupees, then the government tax authorities can impose GAR on such transaction. And in case if GAR is invoked, then they will not be given a benefit of treaty. So why GAR is conceptually very important? Because it is emphasizing on substance over form principle. It is piercing the artificial wheel, and it is a single step used to override treaty provision where tax avoidance is the primary motive. And Rule 10U, 10UC provide the procedural framework for GAR implementation. Lastly, we need to discuss the BEPS. After this, there is a slide for tax equalization, which is basically nothing but a beneficial tax scheme for NRIs. And it is very simple form I have explained in these slides. So taxation of NRI, as it is not part of today's topic, but I have covered it in my presentation here. So I would just like to be it here, but I will not discuss it today. So let us just see. BEPS is a, as I already explained, that BEPS is a framework given by the OECD, to the multinational enterprises, and these measures are basically to prevent the abuse of taxes or abuse of treaty which is happening, and it wants to avoid the shifting of profits. So India is taking a strong role in this BEPS measures, and India is strong adopter of BEPS measure, actively updating its laws for transfer pricing, anti-avoidance, and digital taxation to plug loopholes and align with the global standards. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. And thank you so much to everyone for the patient listening.
Thank you very much, Ankita. And as in initial stage only, at inception only, I said one of the youngest chartered accountant is going to deliberate on the such a complicated topic. And you justified your role here, Ankita, very well. Uh,
Thank
though
you.
it was now it was virtual, so we could not keep it interactive. But next time, whenever possible, we'll invite you in WIRC because time was limited, topic was very vast. Still, you covered transfer pricing, GAR, BAPS, and DTAA also. So thank you very much, Ankita, for sharing your wisdom with us. And we'll be looking at you for more such interaction virtually and offline also. I would like to thank all the delegates, having been it is a audit period and evening time. Still, you are stuck to the screen and share took the benefit of this knowledge sharing. Friends, now we will be meeting on 1st October next Tuesday, and that will be our eighth session of this DTSC series. And the topic will be penalties under section 271 AA, 270 AA, 270 A, and 271 AC. And the learned senior faculty will be Kishore Phadke. So we will be see you on 1st October. Hopefully, we are positive. I can't comment officially, but we are positive that pressure of tax audit will be released by then in whatever best possible way. Thank you very much. We'll see you again. Thank you. Mishra ji.